Hey everyone, Nathan here, president of Saybrook University. Welcome to another episode of Saybrook Insights. About 25 years ago, I found myself knee-deep in graduate school studies, focusing on a multidisciplinary program with sociology, psychology, history, and political economy and educational context framing the curriculum. During this time, we all started reading legal scholarship in this newish field of critical legal studies, specifically critical race theory. And, it was interesting, but it was really also very esoteric. And, its applicability, while possible, probably wasn't all that great at the time. I mean, you could see it made sense, but in the early days, it was very dense reading. But it did shed light on systems and structures, especially around race, gender, and class, and how these played a role structurally, institutionally, from a legal, political set of perspectives. We also looked at these theories in the educational domain through work of scholars like Gloria Ladson-Billings. Fast forward the past year when we had all of this talk about critical race theory being taught in schools, K-12 schools specifically, and I did a double take. Clearly, if this was the case, these kids were budding legal scholars big time. I mean, they could bypass the LSAT for that matter. And as the argument came into sharp relief, it became clear to me this was code for teaching about anything related to race, diversity, equity, or inclusion. It was a means of manipulation of a particular area of study in graduate school, not K-12 education. And whether it was teaching about the history of the Civil War, or the long stain of slavery on our country, or civil rights, the risk of being labeled a critical race theory aider and abetter, especially now, was pretty high. Brought me back to the days when we were doing work with skinhead counterculture and trying to understand that during my graduate work. And my professor and several of us on his research team were labeled dangerous by I won't give the gentleman's name, but you can look it up if you want to Google it. And the reality was that people who were interested in understanding and dismantling these structures to help make the world fair, more equitable, better, were seen as problematic. When in actuality, everyone wants that seat at the table, but more importantly, there are many out there, not just in graduate school, community activists, folks who are working day by day, who care deeply that every American has the right to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness. And so now in the current context with critical race theory, when folks like myself who studied it see it and hear it on the news stations, I'm like, I don't think what they're teaching is critical race theory. But folks making the argument have doubled down, asserting, you know what we're talking about. It's all of it. And so it goes and has been going. Indeed, talking about race relations and improving our communities through greater equity, inclusion, and representational diversity is part of the curriculum some schools are attempting to do in some locations. More specifically and more commonly, though, it's just getting kids up to speed on the basics of their history and their civics. Working to improve these is part of what schools, communities, and good-hearted citizens are trying to do, as I mentioned just a minute ago, in an effort to improve the promises spelled out in our founding documents. And sometimes being exposed to those truths can make us really uncomfortable, exposing our own biases, our own struggles in how we live, learn, and work. And let's face it, education is about discomfort. Learning new things, any new thing, can be uncomfortable. Algebra and calculus come to mind. For me, Mr. Kelly, my freshman year in junior high. It's a new language, and it's uncomfortable to learn new languages. New truths about the world, recognizing the effects that these have. And like many others who get these new languages like in the early times of our youth and we're trying to figure our way through it, it's really difficult, or it can be. And like many others, as someone who grew up in a predominantly white rural area of the country, learning the historical and sociological truths during graduate school. Now, graduate school was difficult, and frankly, I realized I had missed out on so much. So in addition to algebra and calculus in those early days of high school, it took me several years to just get exposed to the issues and challenges related to race, racism, slavery, etc. And our school system has a long way to go in this space. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about critical race theory, but it's much more than that, right? It's about the education, the activism. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about how do we get to a new place, a new reality, and how do we support each other in that process? Moreover, our communities are hurting across the country, hurting in ways that are emotional, psychological, and physical, and bringing empathy to the conversation. Listening more, hearing each other out is critical, and also taking care of one another. Healing for the healers, one might say. Enter Ms. Cassondra Jackson, a PhD student in mind-body medicine. Cassondra and I have had the privilege of working together on a number of projects, including a recent Instagram Live event focused on critical race theory. Cassondra is one of those incredible human beings who seems to have the capacity and energy for everything, including her work as a community educator activist striving to improve her community's health and well-being, in addition to shedding light on race, racism, and increasing equity for all. On top of all of her work, she's a full-time doc student about to graduate, and we're going to help her get through this year. And she's also working hard on a number of other projects that, simply put, are wicked impressive. We're going to dig into a number of topics, including her community work, the opportunities and challenges in consciousness raising around race, critical race theory, her hopes for the future, and her thoughts on mind-body medicine, especially as it relates to healing healers and supporting those who are active in the community work. I'm looking forward to our time together, so let's get to it with Ms. Cassondra Jackson. It's the wonderful, the venerable, the amazing, the incredible Ms. Cassondra Jackson. Cassondra, welcome to Saybrook Insights. You're one of our first students to be interviewed this season, so it's a real honor to have you here. Before we get started, tell us all about yourself, your personal history, and how you found yourself journeying to and with Saybrook University.
Well, it started when life began eons ago.
Back in the primordial soup, right? Yeah.
Right. Before man roamed the earth. Well, my journey to Saybrook, it went a lot of different directions. I started with my interest in psychology back in actually like middle school, elementary schoolish. I used to love going to thrift stores and getting psychology books. And of course, they were all textbooks. And I would pretend play counselor with my friends. So I would go to their house. And I had this one friend in particular. She would sit in her recliner and she'd recline back and I'd be like, so tell me about your day.
Now, wait. So did you charge her? Did she have insurance? How did that all work? You know?
She had great snacks at her house.
Okay.
And that's pretty much like how it kind of began. So I just kind of took it there to moving into counseling. So I went and got my master's, and then I found myself becoming increasingly interested in alternative medicines. So at one point in time, I was having issues with my blood pressure and some insomnia. Well, not some, a lot of insomnia, and a few other things. And I was like, I don't want to go on the blood pressure pills and have to do all that. So I went to a holistic doctor and had all these tests done, like hair strand tests and all kind of things. And I learned a lot about myself and my minerals in my body and even about muscle testing. And so it went from there to doing herbal supplements. And then I also was interested in crystals. So I started looking into crystals and learning about meanings and things like that. And so I got my first quartz crystal and life took out from there. Ended up going into like Reiki trainings and then shamanic practitioner training, apprenticeship, and everything went everything and everywhere. Full on expansion. So yeah, and that's how I came here. I finished my master's. I was gonna look into counseling psychology, and then I talked to someone, and she was telling me about forensic psychology, and she's like, "Yeah, it's just what I love to do." And I was like, "You know what? Let me find something I love to do where I could just marry everything that I want. And so that's when I Googled, and then that's when I found Saybrook, and I was like, well, this mind body medicine program is everything that I want. So here I am.
It's like the mashup for you. You can do whatever you really put your mind to and what your passions are, right? Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And so you are, I think I mentioned in the intro, you're real close to finishing that PhD, right? How far along are you?
I am currently revising my proposal, and I feel like this is my grand finale. It's the gateway of everything.
All right. So within the next year, probably you'll be doctor.
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely.
So I have to tell you, I get exhausted thinking of the long days I have. And then I look at everything you do and I'm like, oh my God, how does she do it? Like seriously, you do everything. Whether it's community activism to the work you do at the university with student groups to the Jedi Council to the all the readings you got to do, the writing you do, and then I think you're in like another 5 or 6 other community groups, and you do it all with such a joy. I'm sure you probably get tired on the back end, but I have to say, like, the way you just kind of joyfully move into that and out of that space. And of all the things you've been doing, maybe what's your biggest priority or two that you find is maybe mission critical work at this moment in time? Maybe besides the doctorate, of course, that's kind of mission one, right? Or priority one.
Oh, that's a lot. I think being a change maker. I'm always one, and that's kind of what motivates me is because when I see problems and I'm like, does anyone else see that? Like, have you seen that? That's right there. Does no one notice that? So I tend to point things out, but also I like to find solutions for things, or at least help find solutions. And so whenever, like, even back to elementary school when I was counseling my friends, it was all about just kind of seeing how I can help people find answers to things or figure out things. And so I think that's kind of what like spurs is like, well, what can I do to help? Like, I don't have all the answers at all, but I'm pretty sure there's something I could do to help. And so I would say like that's what really like motivates me is just being of service.
That's great. So what are the kind of things that you're doing now, the top 1 or 2 that you can, top of mind, that really feel like you're able to apply that problem solving orientation that you have?
I would say right now, I am enjoying my work with the NAACP DeKalb chapter. DeKalb is the county that I reside in, and I joined about 2 months ago. And so I'm like working my way through different committees and also doing volunteer projects. For example, for Juneteenth, I went down and we were helping talk to people about registering to vote, and we were getting people registered to vote. But it was just awesome to be out there with the community and see people from all different backgrounds and talking to them. And it was like working towards that cause because voting is important and it matters. So talking to people about that. And so I've also started working with some people on the health committee. So we're going to have some pretty awesome things coming up with wellness fairs. And once again, I'm just hoping to contribute while also working with officers. I'm going to be helping out with one of the police precincts here to try to see how we can help bridge the gaps between community, but also help them because when it comes to mental health and police having to respond to it here in Metro Atlanta is hard for the police officers, and it's hard for the people, the community involved. So I say that's number one in a lot of the NAACP.
That's like number 1 parts A through Z.
Yeah. Yeah. As I started talking, more started coming out. I was like, oh yeah, that's with them too. That's with them too. So getting involved locally, because I'm involved with a lot of organizations outside of Georgia. And I was like, you got to start at home too. So I just been really working on that.
Hey, spend a minute talking about your work with, I know you're just in the beginning phase of this, right? But with the police, you bring up a really excellent point. I mean, there's been all sorts of talk around defunding the police, abolishing the police. I think the The reality is, as a country and localities are settling somewhere in the middle of that debate, or maybe less than that, but recognizing that cops aren't social workers, right? I mean, and cops would easily say, we're not social workers. And the last thing you want in a mental health crisis situation is, a cop with a gun who that's what they're trained to do, is to de-escalate, right, through ideally nonviolent, but sometimes it rises to violent means. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground in this work, or what you're starting to see emerge, and do you have hope? I mean, do you have any thoughts on how it can get better?
Yes, I have hope. I feel like with so much stigma behind mental health, it impacts us all as a community, regardless of what your role is. But for someone who is an emergency responder, whether you're law enforcement or a fire person, firefighter, or EMS, I think those individuals often have to deal with the most hardcore of the situations. And I say it because I learned more. I felt those thoughts anyways because of working in community mental health for over 10 years. But when I worked for the state's crisis line, that's when I really got insight. And I was speaking with the officers. I was speaking with the people at the different facilities. And I was trying to help them navigate what was going on until while I'm sending mobile crisis team to them. But for like an officer that I talked to the other day, like he was talking about just how long it is, how they have to sit out there with the individual for 2-3 hours until a mobile crisis person comes. And so when you're not trained in mental health or how to connect with someone who may be actively psychotic or even, violent, things like that, it can be scary. And so I think with that, and of course there are crisis trainings that some police precincts do, but I feel like it's one of those things that the more we as a community discuss these topics, discuss the ramifications of them, but also provide some assistance. For example, there is an organization out in California, Mental Health First, that they have a volunteer-based support services for on the weekends during hours where I believe it's 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. But where they want to be that in between, like call them before you call the police when you know that it's the mental health, because they want to try to intervene as much as they can to support. So they have volunteer counselors and people who are advocates and have resources that they can provide. So that way you don't have to worry about calling 911 and getting that law enforcement involvement. They can be doing more serious things in the community.
Yeah, so I think equipping our public safety officers right and also effectively, but also, as you point out, finding innovative ways to reach out before police are involved in the first place can have really good impact.
And also providing support to police officers, because that's a tough job, mental health wise as well.
Well, right. And I think I'll use education as kind of the analog. I used to teach pre-service teachers, right? Those who were going into K-12. And, you'd start talking to K-12 teachers and, they'd be on the, coming into class and talking about, all right, so they want us to do all the courses, all the subjects, and then they want to add character education, financial education, sex ed, everything in between. And I don't know where I'm going to find all the time in the day to learn about all that, to teach it, to figure it out. And then you kind of put it in the context of what teachers pull in as a salary on an annual basis, and it kind of can feel demoralizing, I think, for a lot of our faculty, in K-12 across the country. And I think our police officers are in a similar position. Again, we know that there are bad apples for sure and some real systemic issues at play here as well where racism is concerned. But coming at it from a point of empathy and problem solving is, I don't know, it seems like a very healthy approach to me. And it sounds like you and the NAACP are trying to find that balance, but also recognizing the systemic nature that's there. What have been your conversations around systemic racism with police? Have you all broached that with them about systemic institutionalized racism and what that is and what it looks like and how to combat it?
The conversations are happening more and more. With NAACP DeKalb, a lot of law enforcement members are members of NAACP DeKalb. And so they are involved in different committees and they collaborate on doing community events together. And they've done a lot of cool events, even like going to schools, like especially like on the first week of school and stuff, just standing there giving kids high five as they walk by or giving out school supplies, just being supportive. And so I think that's the biggest impact, is that even though, like you said, they have a lot to do and the salaries are limited. But what I've witnessed just being the time that I've been with NAACP the CAB is that there's a lot of community involvement with them. And I think that's part of it too, is to not just be like, not just live in the community and be an officer, but to be engaged in community activities and with the public and having these discussions. Like they have coffee with the cop where you can like come and like have some dialogue about issues that they're facing or issues that you see in the community. So I think that's what I see, and it gives me hope. We do talk about like the systemic side of things because there is a deep history and issues when it comes to that. And I think as long as we continue having those conversations and exposing each other to different levels and different perspectives, I think that's how we can better impact change, and of course policies and stuff. But that's another story for another day.
Pretty soon you'll be running for public office. That'll be the next thing you do.
I'm open to anything in life.
It's good. It's good. Well, I want to talk about your passion for mind body wellness in a moment. But I was mentioning in the introduction, you and I have been steeped in the work of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion here at Saybrook. And we had that fabulous conversation. For those that don't know, Cassondra has been a leading voice and factor in our work with the YWCA Glendale, Pasadena. And she and I had a great conversation on critical race theory. So I thought maybe for just a few minutes, not the whole session, but time to talk a little bit about, race relations in the country. Where are you seeing progress? Where do you see us still getting stuck? Kind of almost as a part 2 follow-up to the Instagram live event, if you will. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. And it sounds like you've got a lot of hope based on your local work, but any other thoughts you might have from a more global systemic perspective?
You have to have hope and faith. But with that is the actions that do it for me. And where I gather that hope and faith from is by being more active. So for example, I went to critical race theory summer school in actually last month, and this is my second year going. It's like a full week of just awesome. I think this year we had like over 170 presenters total. Totally a multitude of breakout sessions. I wish I could have just split myself and went to everything. But even with our plenary talks, it was amazing to see just how like you have hundreds of people that are on. And even there was a youth plenary that was led every morning, and it was completely youth led. And yeah, it was amazing. And it was things like that that give me that hope and encouragement to keep doing what I'm doing, because you see the youth getting more and more involved. And even like I have discussions all the time with my nieces and nephews. I'm like, you need to know these things, and you're our future. Like, so I just want to be there and keep having these discussions. So I think for me, that level of engagement and then getting younger generations involved is definitely what's keeping us going and what's going to take us further than we are now.
So that's cool. So you're starting, at least from your perspective, you're seeing more youth engagement, which is definitely a positive. I don't know that we always hear that. Like at least in my generation, when we were growing up, everyone was telling us you're not doing enough, and we probably weren't. So that's good to hear that you're seeing young people do more. Where are we getting stuck? From your point of view?
I think where we're getting stuck at is definitely on the political level with different laws and bills being passed. So you have all these people who are working towards change, working to try to educate and bridge gaps. But then you have legislations that are getting passed that not often caps it, but it creates a lot of barriers and challenges for us to be able to move forward in that collaborative healing space. So I think that that's part of it. And once again, that goes back to people voting, voting, and also being more involved politically. Like, not saying everyone has to be a politician, but just like knowing your candidates and who's running for office, what are their stances, what things do they support and not support, how have they been moving and shaping the world around them or influencing the world around them, because that plays a major role. So I think on that political governmental level, is where we see some of the challenges there.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. Yeah. We get stuck a lot in the politics, in the blue red dynamic to the, north south west dynamic. Yeah. You nailed it. So you mentioned you were at a critical race summer camp type of experience, summer experience. And you and I had that lovely conversation on critical race where you explained to the audience what it is, what it isn't. I'm going to ask you to reprise that for us today because we still keep hearing about it. I was just watching the news last night with my wife and son. Leo practically jumped out of his chair and he's like, I'm out. I'm so done with this. Like, can they not can we just agree that they're misusing this term? So that, but it requires patience and explanation, right? And education, because if we just, and not to pick on my son too much here, but at the end of the day, what is it? And what isn't it? What is critical race theory and what isn't it?
Yeah, so critical race theory is like a prism that kind of shows you all these interconnected kind of experiences to our humanness in this life that are impacted by systematic systematic issues that impact us all. So, and that could be from the state level, local level. It could be housing, it could be employment, it could be wealth, education. All these different systems all have an influence on us. And of course, our backgrounds and race do play a role in it. And so what you see here these days is where it's a fight saying, no, race is not involved with it. But it's like the history is there. The history of this country was largely around race. And so when this country was founded and built, race was involved and it was differences, and the differences still remain today. And so now with critical race theory, it gives you different viewpoints to look at it and see how these impact everyone systematically and creates these gaps, these disparities, while also maintaining them. So they were created and they get maintained. For example, briefly when we talked about housing with the critical race theory Instagram Live, and how you had the housing covenants that dictated who could live in the area, where you would have it written in there that either no person of color or no black person could reside in the area. You couldn't sell your house to a black person. You couldn't have one stay with you unless they were just there working for you. And so that created a lot of segregation and redlining. And so we still see that evidence today in major cities across the country, where you have these predominantly black or white areas, and you could trace those back to when they had housing or actively employing housing covenants and things of that nature. So that's just one example of how you can use that critical race theory approach to just kind of think critically about where we've been, where we are, and where we could go. Did that sum it up really good? I was trying to be quick.
You nailed it. I mean, like that was 2 minutes and it made perfect sense. And I think the other piece of this, right, is that, and maybe I should come at it from the angle of, or ask from the angle of, I think we agree on the fact that I don't think K-12 educators are sitting in their classrooms talking about in-depth critical race theory from the lens of legal scholarship. Correct. I mean, they may be teaching about history. They may be teaching about slavery and the Civil War. It's gotten to a point where even talking about the basic core historical facts, it seems like, and maybe I'm mistaken here, so re-educate me, has become controversial. Talking about basic equity and diversity and inclusion topics is somehow verboten because it falls under the umbrella of critical race theory. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, and that's purposeful, because if you want the system to, in the way things are, to stay how they are, when change or people are trying to promote change, you're going to do what you can to keep people confused and to turn people kind of against the idea. And so what do you see with critical race theory is that it's been weaponized, and commonly you see a lot of parents get involved. So it's like those who are anti-CRT are like kind of weaponizing parents, so to speak. So they're like, oh, they're indoctrinating your kids and things like that. So it's like getting parents all angry and flustered and, no, don't teach my kids. And so it creates that fear and panic. And I think that's the goal of those who are opposed to changing the system, because the system is flawed, and some people don't want to admit when it's flawed, or they don't want to recognize that it is flawed. They want to stay the same way for a reason. That's the way it has been, not even just ignoring the fact that there are racial divides in this country on all levels, whether income, education, wealth, housing, they're there. And so you see that thing, and it's the same thing like when schools were integrated and you had the segregation versus integration, where you had parents being weaponized and you had the situation being weaponized. Oh, if you integrate the schools, then that's gonna, your kids aren't gonna learn and blah blah blah, and they were saying similar things. And so we're seeing that this day, even though it's a few decades later.
Yeah, well, fair enough, and I think that's a really interesting point you raised, that the historical continuum hasn't changed much, right? Yeah, weaponizing a certain set of language or a phrase or what have you. Yeah, instead of, I don't know. I mean, for me, I'm always about, let's be explicit and clear in what we're calling something so that we can work at it from a community perspective, right? So if you're uncomfortable talking about the Civil War and the realities and the truth behind it, why is that? If you're uncomfortable talking about civil rights and the movement behind it and how that's impacting us today, why is that? Can we have a conversation around that?
And once again, kids are the future. They are the ones that, and I give a prime example where a small country town, rural town where my family is from, they had segregated proms at high school until like 2007 or 8. The kids, of course, went to school together, but they still had segregated proms. And the kids they wanted to have prom together. But since it's a rural county, a lot of the money comes from the families. So when you have the parents and grandparents say they're not going to give any funding to it if you integrate, then what did the school do? They just kept them separate and always had. Up until a photographer from the New York Times caught wind of it and, made it a thing. And, once it hit the media a few times, so then all of a sudden it's like, oh, to the point where like they did a documentary on it and everything. So it's like one of those things where once again, you have the youth who they're kind of stuck in between the rock and the hard place of you have the institution and then you have the funders and the institution is listening to the funders over what the youth want. And we're seeing it still.
And then an older generation kind of propping up the institution and the funders that say, tradition, this is the way it's always been done. So young people of all types out there, keep doing what you're doing, I think is what the soon-to-be Dr. Jackson is saying.
And older people support them.
Us, right? Well, me. You're not older. I'm older. Yeah, right. That's very good. That's very good. So I wish we could talk about this for like 2 hours because there's so much we could dig into. But if you haven't heard the Instagram Live event, Cassondra does a fabulous job talking about the whole scope of stuff. I'll direct you back to our Saybrook Insights archive. It's like near the top, so you'll see it, and we'll post a link to it in the show notes today. I want to switch over to the focus of your work in graduate school. And you have a passion for mind-body wellness. You got into all sorts of interesting things. Talk a little bit about your work that you're focused in on now and what you hope to advance after you graduate with the mind-body stuff.
Right now, my focus is really on educating people about health and other ways of being. I'm all about mind, body, spirit, emotional, all the above wellness and health and wellness. And I think with the way that I have witnessed everything and even my role of working in community mental health is that the education piece was definitely missing. So for example, like I would work with people who they didn't know what depression was or what that looks like. And a lot of people don't know the different ways that depression can manifest. So you have some people that just go around their whole life and they don't understand why they feel the way that they feel. They just figure it's normal. But it's like, no, there's ways to feel better. Like you can feel better. There's hope. And so I like to bring that to the picture. So I'm always talking about different medicine, different planes of consciousness, so to speak, where you could kind of step back and reevaluate and do some things differently. And like I said, it started when I first got my energy work training in Reiki. And then it just took off from there where I was learning more and more about the kahuna form of shamanism. I was an apprentice for that. And then I learned about theta healing. And it just kind of went there, there, and there. And then I even went to India and I got mystic healer training over there with a practitioner who also did clinical hypnosis and counseling. So that's kind of where I landed at. And I did one of my tracks here at Saybrook in clinical hypnosis because I wanted to learn more about how you can affect change on a deeper level in your core being. I did talk therapy, so I understood that. And so I was like, well, hypnosis is one of those things where I hadn't received any training about it in my psychology degree or my master's in counseling. So I wanted to learn more about working with it. And that's when I really learned about how awesome it was for getting down to the core of things and really helping someone change from that deep, deep, deep inside and to out. And so now I like to help people understand their power in being able to bring about that change from the inside and out. And so that's where my mind body medicine is taking me there. And now I'm just working on merging the activism piece with that mind body medicine.
That's cool. What does that look like when you merge it together? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, right now it's looking like a good step away from self-care into a more supportive way of maintaining your activism. Because when you're involved in activism work, it can weigh you down a lot, especially if you're constantly like either looking at things from the news or battling legislation or being impacted by systemic changes, or even like as a parent, your kid is dealing with things at school because of all the changes that they're having there. A lot of that is what I'm working towards, is helping people to be able to get that inner strengthened, but also be able to maintain. Because I know for me, sometimes I can watch something or read something, I can notice my heart rate change where I feel like I'm breathing more shallow just because it's whatever I'm looking at or reading is affecting me on a deeper level of emotional level that I may not fully understand. But to be aware of your body when that happens, you can take a step back and kind of like, okay, wait, I see something that's coming up in me. Let me process this for a moment and then let me work and release. And so that way you can continue doing the work that you do. So one of my friends, we like to call it healers helping healers. So you have people who are there dedicated to helping impact others and helping change and dedicate to service, but even the helpers need help too.
That's right. Well, especially now, right? We have more practitioners leaving, like healthcare, especially mental health folks, counselors, psychologists leaving than coming in. So you're doing the important work. We need more help for healers. That's right.
The burnouts are high.
Yeah, that's right. Sounds so interesting. I can't wait to read your research on it. That's going to be really cool. And also see how this all manifests when you're out and about doing this in real-time post-degree. All right. So what are 2 or 3 pieces of advice you would give to individuals considering graduate school at Saybrook University or graduate school in general?
Well, the first one is you can make a difference even when you think you can't. That'd be my first one. And then the second one, I would say be open to change and be willing to be a change maker.
So be open to change and be willing to be a change maker. Very nice. All right. So you heard it from Dr. Almost Jackson. She's going to get there this year on her 2 pieces of advice. And keep going, right? I mean, like, keep moving through it. Don't give up. Ask for help and do all those great things. So these are the last 2 questions that I have for all of my guests. The big quick take, right? So it's your quick take on these last 2. You can do this. You are being graded on a curve. What does the term humanistic mean to you?
Humanistic means to me being one that is in tune and concerned with being human and humanity and the interest of humans and human potential, because we often don't think about the potential of humans.
I'll give you an A+ on that one. Fabulous job. All right. And then last question. What are 3 things people can do right now to improve their mental, emotional, or physical health?
Number one, find a program at Saybrook University.
Love it.
Number two, get connected. Get connected to your community or get connected. A lot of things are online today. Get connected to some people that are different from you, that are not your usual circle. And then my third, I would say be committed to learning about yourself.
Ooh, I like that. I like them all, but that's a good one. I don't think I've heard that one yet.
Yeah, be committed to learning about yourself.
Yeah, that's very very powerful, I think, and very humanistic, I think, at the end of the day.
That means we get to go ahead and sign my diploma now. You sign my degree now. I'm done.
If I had that power, I would. I mean, I think you're all that. So the fabulous Cassondra Jackson, before you go, where can people find you on the web? Do you have any books, articles, that kind of stuff?
Books coming soon. I'll be actually publishing some hypnosis research soon. Actually, I have a few things in publication right now, mainly research studies. But yeah, coming soon. You can find me at bluelotusatl.com, or you can find me on Instagram, The Mindful Shaman.
All right, so we've got it. BlueLotusATL.com, the Mindful Shaman. You can, of course, find her online, probably just about anywhere that you're online, including LinkedIn. I know that for sure. Thank you again, Ms. Cassondra Jackson. Fabulous, fabulous job today. We've enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. It's been great.
Well, that was just fantastic. Cassondra, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed Cassondra as much as I did. Remember her three major takeaways. Find a program at Saybrook University. I like that one. That was great. Get connected to your community and be committed to learning all about yourself. I really, really, really like this one, and I think it attends well to our humanistic lineage. If you want to see the video elements, we've created these segments. You can see these on our Saybrook YouTube page. And if you'd like to support the podcast, go to Apple iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review and subscribe so you can get episodes as they come out. If you're on Spotify, leave that 5-star rating and make sure to follow us. You can, of course, subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, including Google, Stitcher, Pandora, iHeart, and others. Remember to check out our show notes for more information on today's guest, including links to websites, books, and the like. And for more about our mind-body medicine program or the university, go to www.saybrook.edu. Click on Areas of Study at the top of the page and locate the mind-body medicine program to learn more. Or simply Google Saybrook University Mind-Body Medicine Program. That's it for today. Thank you all so much for joining us today on Saybrook Insights. Take care and be well.